This is the Infinite Moment Podcast, where we discuss topics that focus on stress relief solutions. Welcome to another episode of the Infinite Moment Podcast. And today we'll be switching it up a little bit. As always, we're going to look at a couple of articles, but we're also going to take a look at some of the strangest fears that have been identified and to some extent explained. And then we're also going to get into where these fears ultimately begin and how fears in general begin. So in this episode, you're probably not going to relate too much to these fears unless you're one of the few people who actually experience one of them. But it's interesting to use it as almost like a case study for where fear comes from and how in our minds an irrational fear and the perspective of the person who's afraid of it, it actually makes sense for them to be afraid of it. So very interesting topic here. Just something a little bit more laid back and a little bit more for the coming season. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let's go ahead and get into the article. This article comes from therecoveryvillage.com. 21 rare and weird phobias you've likely never heard of. Some rare phobias include fear of bathing, fear of mirrors, and fear of the color yellow. Individuals who have these phobias often experience extreme anxiety. A phobia is an irrational fear of an object, situation, or living thing. While fear is a natural response to danger, phobias often occur in response to something unlikely to cause real harm. In some cases, a person with a phobia will meet the diagnostic criteria for a specific phobia, which is a type of anxiety disorder. Someone with a specific phobia will experience intense fear and anxiety when confronted with the source of the phobia, which can include blood, heights, or specific animals like dogs. Phobias are characterized by significant distress and often cause a person to avoid the source of their fear or suffer from extreme anxiety when faced with it. Someone experiencing a phobia that is interfering with everyday life should consider undergoing treatment for their phobia, as outcomes for professional care are typically favorable. What are the weirdest and most rare phobias? While most people have heard of common phobias like the fear of heights, which is acrophobia, or the fear of spiders, arachnophobia, there are many strange, less talked about phobias. Here's a list of 21 weird and rare phobias you may have never heard of. Arachibutyrophobia is the fear of peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth. While the phenomenon has happened to everyone at one point or another, people with arachibutyrophobia are extremely afraid of it. The severity of arachibutyrophobia varies from person to person. Some with this condition may be able to eat small amounts of peanut butter, but others will completely avoid eating peanut butter or anything with a similar consistency. Arachibutyrophobia is a rare phobia that can stem from a greater phobia of sticky things or a fear of choking. It may also stem from a traumatic incident with peanut butter, such as choking on or being allergic to it. Nomophobia is the fear of being without your mobile phone. People with nomophobia experience excessive anxiety about not having their phone with them, their battery being low, or their phone being out of service. Regardless of the circumstances, not being able to use their phone causes people with nomophobia to become panicked and experience extreme symptoms of anxiety. This rare phobia often stems from a person having a cell phone addiction. People with this phobia may be obsessively checking their phones throughout the day and worry they will miss out on contact with loved ones. While nomophobia is generally classified as a rare phobia, cell phone addiction appears to be fairly common. Recent research has shown that around half of both men and women have anxiety surrounding their cell phones. Further, one study found that 23% of male students were labeled as nomophobic, and almost 77% checked their cell phones more than 35 times a day. A group in Italy has suggested that nomophobia should be included as a type of specific phobia. Arithmophobia, the fear of numbers. Many people grew up dreading math class, but people with arithmophobia have a genuine fear of numbers. People with this fear usually experience anxiety associated with doing math or dealing with numbers in general, versus fear of actually seeing the number symbols. The fear of numbers is also sometimes referred to as numerophobia. Arithmophobia can significantly impair a person's life as it is difficult to do many tasks or occupations without dealing with numbers. Plutophobia is the fear of money. Many people probably wish they had more money, but plutophobia is a fear of money or wealth. People with plutophobia may fear wealthy people or fear becoming wealthy themselves. They generally dread money and having to deal with it. People with this fear may potentially sabotage their careers to avoid making more money or becoming wealthy. The fear of becoming wealthy may stem from a fear of the responsibilities and pressures associated with it, or the fear of being the victim of a robbery. Xanthophobia is a fear of the color yellow. People with this rare phobia are usually afraid of any object that is yellow, such as school buses and flowers. People with xanthophobia may avoid the color yellow at all costs, and they may even find yellow foods to be distressing. This phobia tends to interfere with everyday life as yellow things can be found everywhere. Ablutophobia is the fear of bathing, washing, or cleaning oneself. This phobia most often occurs in children and resolves with age, but it can still be present in adults. People with ablutophobia avoid bathing and showering, which can lead to unpleasant body odor and sometimes social isolation. However, their fear of bathing and the anxiety they experience while bathing tends to be so extreme that these consequences pale in comparison. Ablutophobia may result from a traumatic event involving water or fear of getting wet. In some cases, the phobia is related to aquaphobia, which is the fear of water. Octophobia is a fear of the number 8. Interestingly, there are few other known phobias to specific numbers, except for the fear of numbers themselves, which is arithmophobia, and the fear of the number 13. People with octophobia fear the symbol 8 as it appears written down, such as in addresses or advertisements. They also can fear objects presenting in groups of 8s. This rare phobia may come from its resemblance to the infinity sign. It may also come from a traumatic event involving the number 8, such as an accident that happened on the 8th of the month. Optophobia, fear of opening one's eyes. This fear can be extremely debilitating, as it is hard for an individual to carry out daily activities without opening their eyes. People with optophobia may prefer to stay indoors or in dimly lit areas. This phobia is usually associated with a generalized anxiety disorder. Like many other rare phobias, this fear is usually the result of a traumatic incident. Globophobia, fear of balloons. The level of fear varies from person to person and can range from avoiding being near balloons to avoiding places with balloons altogether. In some people, the fear is so great that even seeing a balloon on television triggers intense anxiety. This rare fear can be especially hard for young children, as balloons are often present at children's birthday parties. Globophobia is usually brought on by a traumatic experience with a balloon as a child, such as popping a balloon and being frightened by the noise. It can also be linked to a fear of clowns, as the two are often found together. This next one is the fear of long words. It's pretty difficult to say, it appears, so let's see if we can sound it out. Hippopotamonstrosesquipt allophobia. Hippopotamonstrosesquipt allophobia is a fear of long words. Ironically, it is also the longest word in the dictionary. Another name for this phobia is sesquipallophobia. It is believed that the phobia of long words develops from being embarrassed by pronouncing long words incorrectly. This may occur while reading aloud in front of the class as a child. The phobia can also be common in people with dyslexia. Ephobophobia is a fear of adolescence or youth. People with ephobophobia may perceive teenagers as out of control or dangerous and believe they are rude, unpredictable, and do not follow rules. This fear is thought to develop from the negative portrayal of teenagers in the media. People with ephobophobia are afraid of teenagers and will not want to be around them. People with this fear may avoid going to a friend's house if they have teenagers or avoid places where teenagers tend to hang out. People with omphallophobia will avoid seeing or touching belly buttons, even their own. They might even put a bandage over their belly button to avoid looking at it. They will sometimes avoid places where belly buttons might be exposed, like the beach. A person with linophobia will have an extreme reaction even when just thinking of string, let alone seeing it in person. People with linophobia will avoid string or anything having to do with string, such as sewing or tying shoes. This usually develops from a negative association with string that may stem from a fear of being restrained or restricted. A person who experiences a traumatic event, such as being kidnapped or tied up as punishment, may develop linophobia. It can also develop simply from watching these events on television. Pogonophobia is the fear of beards. This usually stems from an alarming incident with a bearded person. It can also arise from a person not liking that a beard hides someone's face. People with pogonophobia will avoid those with beards and may even have anxiety when looking at a picture of a bearded person. They usually will not be friends with someone who has a beard and will feel extremely nervous when talking to someone who does. Chaetophobia is a fear of hair. This phobia can be a fear of one's own hair, other people's hair, or even animal hair. People with chaetophobia might be afraid of a hairball on the ground or afraid of combing their hair. They often find it extremely difficult to get haircuts and will generally avoid situations where other people touch their hair. This phobia may arise from a traumatic experience involving hair. Some examples are a bad haircut or losing large amounts of hair by going bald. It could also be caused by someone believing that hair is dirty and not wanting to come in contact with it. Related phobias are trichophobia and trichopathophobia. Trichophobia is the fear of loose hair, such as hair that has fallen out onto the clothes or furniture. Trichopathophobia is a fear of hair disease, which can include baldness or change in hair color. Vestophobia is a fear of clothing. For many people, this manifests as a fear of a specific garment. For others, it might come from a fear of tight-fitting clothing that causes one to feel constrained. In other cases, it is a fear of all clothing. This rare phobia can arise from an allergy to a specific type of fabric or a traumatic event associated with a certain piece of clothing. For example, there have been cases where former soldiers develop a fear of military clothing. Ergophobia is a fear of work. People with ergophobia tend to have extreme anxieties associated with a place of work or work environment. Some may have a fear of manual labor or the act of working itself, while others can have a fear of finding a job. All of these cases would be classified as ergophobia. The fear of work can lead to anxiety attacks and impair a person's ability to function professionally. It can have a huge impact on a person's life, as most people need to maintain a job to survive. Ergophobia may stem from occupational burnout, where a person becomes so stressed and exhausted by their job that they feel they can no longer complete it. It can also be associated with negative work experiences like an abusive employer or poor work-life balance. Ergophobia is often related to other specific phobias, such as social phobia, fear of public speaking, or fear of criticism. Decidophobia is a fear of making decisions. Making any kind of decision can seem impossible for someone with decidophobia, as they do not trust their own opinions. A person with decidophobia may excessively rely on others to help them with decision making. They may even turn to external sources such as astrology for advice. Decidophobia could be a part of a larger mental health disorder called dependent personality disorder. One of the symptoms of dependent personality disorder is relying on others to make decisions. Esoptrophobia is a fear of mirrors. This phobia is also sometimes referred to as spectrophobia or catoptrophobia. People with this fear are unable to look at themselves in a mirror. This fear may also extend to any reflective surface. This fear may stem from superstitions about mirrors. For instance, a person may be afraid of breaking a mirror because they believe it will cause them bad luck. Others may fear that they will see something supernatural in a mirror, such as a ghost. Esoptrophobia can develop from low self-esteem, as a person may feel ashamed of their physical appearance and may not want to see it in a mirror. It can lead to depression in some cases, which may require professional treatment in the form of counseling and medication, or I would say maybe meditation. Dapnophobia is the fear of dining with others. This often manifests as a fear of dinner parties and may stem from a fear of dinner conversations or having to carry out a conversation while eating. It It may be related to an underlying social phobia. In many cases, dapnophobia is triggered by traumatic events from an individual's past, such as being ridiculed as a child for the way they ate or for not following proper etiquette at the dinner table. The fear of dining with others can also be related to the fear of being criticized for the way a person eats. A person with dapnophobia may feel awkward eating in front of others and therefore avoid it. People with dapnophobia tend to eat alone or prefer to eat in silence if they do eat with others. Phobophobia is a fear of phobias. This can be described as a free-floating anxiety, where a person spirals into a circle of anxiety due to fearing fear itself. In that respect, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Phobophobia is commonly co-diagnosed with other types of specific phobias and is often associated with anxiety disorders. People with phobophobia will often avoid social situations or other situations that can lead to anxiety. When extreme, it will greatly interfere with an individual's everyday life. Alright, so that was a list of 21 of some of the weirdest phobias. Alright, so there were some pretty weird ones in there. I mean, the first one, just to start off, fear of peanut butter. You would think that's super irrational, right? Most people are like, how can you fear peanut butter? But I guess if you can put yourself in a person's shoes who had a traumatic experience where they may have almost died from like choking on it or something, then it can kind of start to make sense. But it's still, you would think that would be super, super rare. However, the next one is a lot more common than I think most of us would like to admit. That one was nomophobia, which is the fear of being without your phone, or mobile phone to be more specific, which I think that number continues to increase as younger and younger children are now having access to all types of devices, whether it be tablets or phones. And I mean, every adult pretty much has to have one to, I feel like, be even in the workforce at this point. So obviously the majority of us heavily rely on these devices, but some people have extreme fear around being without it for, really any amount of time. Now, some of these can lead to some pretty destructive situations, such as plutophobia, which is the fear of money. Because when you break down what money is, it kind of comes back to opportunity. And what that opportunity will be, up to you if you're acquiring that money, that kind of asset. But it gives you opportunity to do more things and accomplish more things that, it takes a certain amount of money to accomplish. So when your fear of money, you're actually potentially limiting your opportunity, unfortunately. Another unhealthy one would be like ablutophobia, which was the fear of cleaning yourself or bathing. Obviously, that can lead to health problems and unpleasant smell and unhygienic practices. I would say the funniest one was the fear of long words. Just trying to say that word is kind of crazy, but I guess it's a thing where some people, I would imagine, especially if they were maybe pressured into being in spelling bees or just weren't good spellers in general, then there can be some trauma around that. This one was pretty interesting to me, the pogonophobia, which is a fear of beards. I guess that would make people pretty afraid of me. It says it makes people feel extremely nervous when talking with someone who has a beard. That's interesting. I wonder if it has to be a certain size beard, or if it's like even related to like fear around Santa or something like that. Chaetophobia, which was the fear of hair. Just imagine that, and like being afraid to let someone touch your hair to cut it or whatever, and you're just basically gonna have to let it grow, or I guess just fully maintain it yourself. But that's pretty wild. Fear of hair, or even clothing. Ergophobia, fear of work. I would say a lot of people may have ergophobia, but I will say that we do live in an environment where I think most people are overworked and not really paid fairly for the amount of energy that they expend. So yeah, it's not very surprising why ergophobia, in my mind, would actually be rare. Would actually be fairly common. And then phobophobia, another funny one that's somewhat of a paradox where it's the fear of phobias in themselves. So, yeah, that was a list of 21 phobias that, you may never have heard of, but, have been identified. And there are some people, at least one person, has experienced one of these fears. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next article. All right, so this comes from a post on magazine.vunela. It's called The Root of Fear. There's a root fear that we are taught very early on in our lives. This root fear is embedded in us by early childhood circumstances and conditions. As we grow, this root fear begins to produce tendrils that become elements of our personality, behavior, and habits. As we mature, we are able to trace back all current fears to this root fear. And by tracing it back to the root, we're able to master and even harness these fears. My root fear is a fear of rejection. Instability, violence, mixed messages fed this fear, and my naturally hypersensitive soul took this fear of rejection and amplified it. This fear of rejection led directly to a constant need for validation, a drive to prove my worth. While this made me incredibly tenacious, it also thwarted a lot of relationships and growth, and robbed me of happiness. Denying this fear of rejection led to many years of anxiety, depression, and even migraines. But then I discovered this truth. Any learned fear can be unlearned. The process of unlearning the fear of rejection was part of an extensive journey of a spiritual awakening, discovering my mission and deepening the relationships that I value the most. The secret weapon in the effort to eradicate this root fear was love, specifically self-love. By learning to love and accept myself unconditionally, I was able to see past the root fear to my innate value. I learned that this fear of rejection was in direct contrast to an onboard belief in defiance and individualism. No wonder there was depression and anxiety. I was trying to not fear by being someone that I thought would be accepted. I was able to harness my tenacity, curiosity, and openness to focus not on fearing rejection less, but on simply loving more. Along the way, I learned another truth that I share in every speech I give. No one's words or actions add to or take away from your value. I will leave you with this. I used to hate my root fear. I viewed it as an enemy, a threat to my well-being. Now I've realized that my root fear is a gift that has spurred me to deeper levels of understanding and higher levels of awareness. Without this root fear, I very likely would have never embarked on the journey to discover the true me. What is your root fear, and how does it influence your life? Alright, so that was just a quick account of someone's story on how they overcame one of their root fears. They first identified that root fear as the fear of rejection, which they traced back to their childhood where they had been rejected and was basically traumatized and didn't heal from it. Trying to basically overcompensate by taking actions that would make sure they would not have to rely on others. But going back and understanding what that fear has caused them and what they lost due to allowing that fear to play out in an unhealthy way. And when they finally realized what had taken place, they were able to go back and review that and understand what they needed to do to overcome it and to let it go in a healthy way so that they can move on and make their life more positive and also be able to help influence others in a positive way. So yeah, I think this was very important to go over because it shows that it doesn't matter what your fear is. It doesn't matter how uncommon or rare. It has a root cause. It has a root to it, a reason why it's there, and it can be overcome. So there's really good information there to gain perspective on different fears and try to understand the root causes of fears in the first place. All right, so with that being said, I'll catch you guys next time. Take it easy.